Hi, I'm excited to be having you join me to do a wood sign, and I've got all kinds of really great little tips and tricks. So the first thing I want to show you is that this is what I will produce for you, and it is in 3 layers. So you have a backing, okay, so it's like a paper backing, and then if you pull that, you see the blue actual vinyl stencil, and then on top of this there is kind of a clear or kind of a cloudy clear transfer tape that's on top. So there's 3 layers. I just wanted to make you aware of that before I get started. And what you're going to start with is have some of your tools. So I have my favorite gift card here, of course, to use for smoothing. And all I'm going to be doing is kind of going like this and using the side edge to kind of smooth that out. Now you can see that there are lots of bubbles in the transfer tape. That's not in the vinyl, so don't worry about those little bubbles, okay? But I'm just kind of going like this, and more than anything, I'm just trying to make sure that my blue vinyl stays with my transfer tape. That's what that step is about. So then I'm going to start to pull this off. And you see how I kind of keep pressing between my fingers to make sure that any little pieces are wanting to stay up. Oh, this is perfect. I'm glad this happened. Do you see these little blue pieces that have stayed with my backing? I can't have that. They need to stay with my design. That's part of my design. Like I'm taking the little pieces out of my letter. So I had to go back in and kind of press that again and kind of get those to stay with my design. And so I just keep slowly pulling this back, and as little pieces want to stay there, I'm going to keep pressing them back in, letting them know they've got to come with my vinyl. So I'm pulling and pressing at the same time. And almost there. Be careful. I really want to stress, be careful about making sure that this does not collapse over on itself, because if it does, it'll be nearly impossible, not impossible, but nearly impossible to get it unstuck without ruining your vinyl stencil. So be very, very careful with this. And frankly, I'm sitting right now, but I would be standing. And so for the other pieces here, I'm going to be standing so that you can really just have this zoom in on exactly what I'm doing, okay? So again, I'm pressing, and I'm going to keep making sure that this is just going back and has a place to go. And again, I'm pressing all those little blue pieces that keep wanting to stay with my backing, and pulling off. I'm almost there, and of course one more one to stay. It's all the little pieces within an A or an E or things like that that love to do that. Set your backing piece aside. You're going to want to actually use that later, so don't get rid of it yet. So at this point now I have just my blue vinyl stencil that has the transfer tape on top. And I'm going to show you the next step in just a moment. Okay, the next step is, again, I have my vinyl stencil as well as the transfer tape on top, and I'm going to keep it nice and taut, so I'm holding it nice and firm from each end. Again, we do not want this to collapse in on itself, and it's almost like static cling. It loves to do that, so just be very aware of that step. So now I'm going to hold it on here, and of course I'm standing up now. I'm going to make sure that I can really see where I'm going with this, and I'm making sure that the edge of my design is lining up with the top edge and the bottom edge, as well as the sides of my board. Now my board, I want to just mention also that you need to make sure that you have done at least 1, if not 2 coats of paint before you put your vinyl on, and it has to be thoroughly dry. So I cannot emphasize that enough. If you rush that step, this will end up pulling up the paint. But as long as this is bone dry, that reddish orange color that I've got back here, you've got to let that dry for probably a good ½ hour before you put this on here. But feel it with your hand, make sure it's bone dry before you put this sticky stencil on there. Otherwise, you're going to make a mess of your board. So, really important step there. At any rate, I've got that on there, and now I can see that it looks like it's even on each side, and I have used the actual design to look and see that I'm level here, because I don't want to be crooked. And I don't want to use the hand cut edge that I have cut for you. Don't use that as your guideline, because it may not be even. That's just been hand cut with scissors. So be sure to really eye that, and before you press it on, you can usually kind of pick it up and adjust it a little bit. Boy, I think I just got lucky because I pressed it a little bit. But I was able to still pick it up again, and I could try it again if I didn't get it just right the first time. And again, I'm going to just kind of level that, make sure my two side edges are equidistant from the edges there, and I've got everything right where I want it. So once I have that where I want it, and I verify that, and again, standing over it is the way that you can see that accurately. If you're sitting, you're going to see it at a strange angle, and you won't know that that's nice and level, and you're going to have a crooked design. So now that I like that, I'm going to take my hands and I'm going to smooth that out and kind of get that to start to adhere to the board. Again, I'm going to take my favorite gift card, credit card, whatever, smoothing tool you'd like, and I'm going to smooth it on there. So kind of like what I did before, I'm just smoothing. And because that transfer tape is still on there protecting the vinyl stencil, you don't have to worry about being real careful with it. But the next step that I'm going to show you, you're going to want to be a little more gentle with it. So now we have to take our transfer tape off, and that's going to reveal all the openings in our stencil that will give us something to paint in. So you can see that I'm removing now that transfer tape, and surprisingly, you would think at this point that this would be, because it's real sticky, you're going to notice that when you have yours, you would think that this is going to be a really difficult step, but it actually comes right off, and it doesn't take all those little pieces with it, which is really nice. So it usually comes off pretty quick and easy and clean. This here, I am going to just wad that up so it's not sticking to things, and that can be tossed. So now I have my actual stencil here, and I have another thing that I'm actually kind of glad happened. So you can see that there's a little wrinkle here in my stencil. I want to get that out. So I'm going to pick up this corner here. I want to be careful not to stretch the vinyl, but you see how I just eliminated that little gap. I'm going to set that back down, and I'm going to carefully kind of smooth that out. And it doesn't matter if there's a wrinkle in the blue tape around. Where you don't want to have any kind of gap or wrinkle is in the actual design. So I have to say that usually this doesn't happen, but since it did, I wanted to point that out just in case it happens to you. But most of the time they go down nice and smooth and flat. So I'm going to take the same card now, and again I'm going to just be a little bit more gentle now, but I just want to make sure that my stencil is down there nice and tight. And the other thing that I want to do is use some sort of a tool, and it could be, you know, the end of a brush, it could be, I don't know, even the end of your fork maybe, but you just want to make sure that you're kind of careful. In fact, I kind of like the idea maybe of using this, but I'm just going to lay it nice and flat. So can you see, I hope, that I've got my finger on top of it and I'm laying it flat as opposed to jabbing at it. And I'm going to just go all along my whole design and make sure that the edges of all those openings are nice and tight. Because if they're not nice and tight, what's going to happen when I put my paint on here is I'm going to end up with little seeping paint splotches that don't give me a nice clean design. So I'm being quite gentle with this. I'm firm but gentle. So what I'm going to do is keep going around here, and I'll have you join me when I'm done for the next step in painting. All right, I've got my vinyl all smoothed down. Again, nice and flat and gentle but firm, okay? You wanna be careful that you're not gouging this, either the wood or the vinyl. You don't wanna cut that or something like that. So again, just nice and flat, going all around that. So I'm done all with that now. Trying to use some nice little tools that you would have at home. And next, I'm gonna use a little sponge brush. You could even use an actual sponge. Just cut a little piece and kind of dab it in there and dab this on here. So if you don't have a sponge brush, you probably have an old sponge that you could use at home. So I put a little white paint on here. That's what I'm gonna use for my design here. You could use multiple colors, however you wanna do this, but I'm dabbing into the paint with my sponge brush. And what I want you to be aware of is that that's actually too much paint. So I'm gonna dab it off a little bit. That's the trick. So there are a few little tips here that I have. One is don't go heavy on the paint with this. You want to do 2, maybe even 3, depending on the contrast of colors that you're working with. If you feel like it still needs maybe a 3rd layer, you could probably do that. But I do caution you not to let it go too long. You've got to complete this. Once your vinyl is on the board, you need to complete this step and get it removed. I'm gonna say probably in the next hour or 2, something along those lines. If you don't let it sit overnight or don't let it sit all day, because you're gonna have a hard time getting that sticky vinyl off of your board again, okay? So anyway, back to this, you have to work in layers. So you wanna dab that paint off a little bit, and then it's gonna be just like a tiny little dabbing sort of a motion. You don't wanna sweep, not like when you were doing your board. Just kind of dab all of the little openings in the design and pick up a little bit more of your paint there, your fancy paint palette. And again, you're just dabbing, not too heavy, and you don't want to be sweeping, because if you've got too much paint on there, or if you sweep with your brush, you're going to end up pushing that paint underneath your vinyl design, and then you don't have a nice, clean, professional look that you're after. So that's the motion there, and you're just going to continue there. And in the next segment, I'll meet back up with you, and I will have done this twice. All right, so I'm going to do one whole set here from beginning to the next layer. I want to allow a good 15 minutes. Make sure it's pretty dry. It doesn't have to be perfectly dry, but pretty dry. And then I'm going to go back in, I'm going to do the exact same thing. So you're much better off with 2 thin layers than 1 big, thick, globby layer, okay? So 2 thin layers, and I'll meet you back here in just a few minutes. All right, we're back now. I have 2 layers, and again, it has to be dry between layers for it to actually have the effect of a second layer and give you that nice, rich coverage that you're looking for with those layered paints. And so I've got 2 layers of the white on there. I've made sure that I really get into the crevices. I can't really see any opening of the edges. I can't see any of my orangey color there showing through. So I'm sure that I've got that all on there nicely. It's dry, as you can see. And I'm going to now just pull up a corner here and literally just pull this right off. You don't even have to be careful as long as it's dry. And the magic starts to happen. And you can kind of pull and weave through here, and it's fine that this all tears. You're not going to be able to save and reuse it. People think that sometimes, and it's just not going to happen. So I'm going to get that all pulled off, and I'm going to show you that next step of pulling out all the little inner pieces. So it's all those little pieces that we're trying to stay with our backing when we were originally taking the backing away from our blue vinyl. So you can see that I've got little pieces like this that I can pull out, and here that are easy to grip and pull out. But there are lots of places that are still filled in, and that's actually painted vinyl that has to be removed. So what I have here, this is my favorite tool here, okay? And this is just something I actually found at Harbor Freight. And they're just great little pokey tools. So if you have something like that, that's what I would recommend. Or an ice pick or something like that. I did think that maybe like the prong of a fork could be used well for that, and possibly even a toothpick. But I'm going to show you with something I know is going to work really well here. And you can experiment with whatever you have at home. But what I want you to see is that rather than going downward and gouging at the wood, that's going to gouge my wood and remove the paint underneath this little piece of vinyl that I want to remove. Instead, I'm going to go at a strong angle and kind of flat with my wood. And I just need to find the little edge. So if I can't see it, I try to feel for it. And so then I will just kind of go like that and pull that right out. Now I'll stick that on there so I don't have all these little pieces everywhere that I've got to pick up later, unless you're going to toss out whatever surface you're working on. And again, I'm just pulling all of these pieces out. So I'll be back in just a second and we'll have our finished piece. Okay, so we are back for the final step here, and we did, go through and pick up all those little pieces that were inside the letters. And so now I've got, kind of a nice clean design, as you can see, so I'm super happy with that. But there are a couple things I wanted to mention, and that is that I tried the toothpick, I tried the fork, and I'm sorry I didn't do those prior, but I'm thinking that if you don't have something more along these lines, that you might be better off with like, a needle, and kind of like the long end of, the thickest needle maybe that you can find in your house. So again, look for something that has a little bit of a point and it has the strength. That's what I found with the toothpick, is that it kind of just kept, not breaking the tip, but flattening the tip, as opposed to getting underneath the vinyl, which is what we needed to do. So just wanted to give you that little point too. The other thing is that sometimes you might have a little smear, you know what I mean? It might be from having globbed paint on too much, or just maybe not even any fault of your own. But if you do find that you smeared into your background a little bit, make sure, and I will add this as a little note in the beginning because I didn't say this earlier, but make sure that you keep a little bit of your color, especially if you've mixed the color. Make sure that you keep a little bit of that moist, because acrylic, of course, does dry really fast, which is great for creating our project, but not so great if you're having to try to reconstitute that paint color or recreate that paint color. So if it's just out of the bottle, you'll have no problem just kind of going over that. Might take 2 or 3 coats. And that's where you're going to have a small brush come into play. And so I have that in water. I'm going to take my paper towel here and I'm going to dry it like this, okay? I'm going to dry it so that I kind of pinch that top, but I also dry the handle where it's sat in water. Otherwise, you're going to go like this and be doing careful work. And in the meantime, water's going to drip down that handle and you're going to have a little pool right where you were trying to do some nice careful work at the end. So make sure that that handle, as well as the tip of that little brush, gets dried off. And then I would just go into my paint. I'm going to show you a nice little trick here. So I would just take a little bit of paint on the tip of that brush and I'm going to roll my brush so that it evenly coats the paintbrush and isn't all globby on there. That's also going to give my paintbrush the finest point that it will give me. And I could either touch up with my reddish orange color there, or in my case, I gouged a tiny bit of my lettering here when I was taking the vinyl off. And so I just wanted to show you that I'm just going to kind of brace with my pinky here, and I'm just going to very carefully, I should have my glasses on for this kind of careful work, but I'm just going to touch that little bit of white up there. So if you have any tiny little touch-ups to do, you can do that with a little brush at the end. And if you catch it quick, you can always kind of scrape that and clean that up a little bit. So I had another one like maybe right there, and just a tiny little touch with the tip there. But make sure that you brace your hand, whether it's your pinky or kind of on the dry part of the board, so that you can get in there and do really careful work without being like, trying to get at it and you can't control it, okay? So those are my tips for you. And I just want to show you that I'm super happy with my sign. I'm all ready for my wedding. And I look forward to having the opportunity to help you create a sign that will be special for you as well. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to have a chance to actually see you in person soon. And until then, be well.